Mr. Mercer, according to these records, your property received $312,000 from the Cedar Ridge HOA. The woman on my porch said it like she was asking whether I'd signed for a package. I just stared at her. It was 7:12 on a cold Tuesday morning, and 10 seconds earlier my biggest problem had been a stripped hinge on a cabinet door in my workshop. Now a stranger holding a black briefcase was telling me I'd apparently been paid enough money to buy a small house. The smell of fresh coffee followed me through the open front door while my compressor hummed faintly in the detached garage behind me. "I'm sorry," I said. "Received what?" She introduced herself as Evelyn Price, an independent auditor reviewing Cedar Ridge Estate's finances. Gray coat, practical shoes, calm voice. The kind of person who looked like she alphabetized receipts for fun. She opened a thick folder and turned it toward me. Mercer Property Drainage Rehabilitation. My address sat directly underneath. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. I've never heard of that project. Evelyn didn't react. She simply removed another page. "Then I need you to look at this." There was my name, Daniel Mercer, printed beneath an authorization agreement approving construction on my property. Below it was a signature that looked close enough to mine to fool someone who'd never watched me sign a check. I had. That wasn't my signature. Then I noticed the permit number. I knew that number immediately because I'd spent 6 weeks getting it approved by the county. It belonged to my detached workshop, a 1,200 square foot building behind my house where I stored tools, lumber, and 23 years of contractor paperwork. Someone had taken a real permit connected to my property and attached it to something that didn't exist. Evelyn watched my face carefully. "Mr. Mercer, did you authorize Cedar Ridge Estates to perform drainage construction here?" "No." "Did you receive any payments connected to this project?" "Not $1. Her fingers stopped on the edge of the folder. For the first time, her professional expression changed. "Barely, but I saw it." She reached inside her briefcase and pulled out a stack of invoices held together with a black binder clip. The paper made a dry snapping sound in the morning silence. "Then we have a serious discrepancy." I looked at the numbers. 48,000, 76,000, 91,000. Smaller payments scattered between them like breadcrumbs. At the bottom of the summary page was the total, $312,000. All supposedly spent using my property. All approved under paperwork carrying my name. And suddenly I knew exactly whose fingerprints were probably buried inside that folder. Cynthia Whitmore, president of Cedar Ridge Estates. 18 months earlier, Cynthia had stood beside the drainage ditch behind my workshop in polished boots and an expensive cream coat, smiling while she asked me to surrender permanent access to a strip of my land. I told her no. Her smile hadn't disappeared. It had simply hardened. "Daniel," she'd said, "you're making this much harder than it needs to be." Standing on my porch with an auditor holding $312,000 worth of paperwork I had never signed, I finally understood what she'd meant. Cynthia hadn't needed my permission. She'd apparently decided my property was more useful if she simply pretended she already had it. To understand how my name ended up on paperwork I had never signed, you have to go back 18 months to a Saturday morning when Cynthia Whitmore first walked onto my property, carrying a clipboard and acting like the dirt under her shoes belonged to her. Back then, I was 46 years old and had been a licensed general contractor for more than 20 years. I had spent most of my adult life around framing lumber, concrete dust, diesel exhaust, and people who understood that a signed agreement meant something. Cedar Ridge Estates was supposed to be the quiet chapter. I had bought the house 5 years earlier, mostly because of the detached workshop sitting about 80 feet behind it. 1,200 square feet, 2 overhead doors. Enough room for my table saw, compressor, tool cabinets, and the collection of project binders I had accumulated since starting my business. I kept everything. Receipts, permits, inspection reports, change orders, warranty cards. My sister Rachel used to joke that if somebody asked what I bought for lunch on a Tuesday 10 years ago, I probably had the receipt filed alphabetically. She was not far off. Construction teaches you that memory is cheap and paper is expensive right up until the day you need it. That morning, I was replacing weather stripping around the workshop door when I heard gravel crunch behind me. Cynthia came down the side yard without waiting to be invited. She was 54, perfectly composed, blonde hair cut just above her shoulders, cream-colored coat without a speck of dust on it, even though she had just crossed 40 feet of bare ground. Cynthia had been president of the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association for almost 3 years, and she carried herself like the neighborhood had been issued to her personally. She stopped beside the shallow drainage channel running along the rear edge of my lot. "Daniel, we need to discuss access." I set my utility knife on the workbench. The air smelled like pine sawdust and cold soil. "Access to what?" She tapped her clipboard toward the ditch. "Cedar Ridge wanted to improve stormwater drainage through the neighborhood," she explained, "and my property was strategically important. She needed me to sign a permanent access easement allowing association contractors to enter that strip whenever necessary." I asked to see the survey. Her smile tightened. She showed me a color map with a blue line crossing the back of my lot as casually as if property boundaries were suggestions. I knew my deed. I knew the county plat. More importantly, I knew that drainage channel sat entirely inside my property line. "I will have my attorney review it," I said. "Until then, I am not signing anything." Cynthia stared at me for 2 quiet seconds. Somewhere across the neighborhood, a leaf blower started whining. Then she smiled again. "This benefits everyone, Daniel. Then proper paperwork should not be a problem." That was the moment something changed in her face. Not anger. Calculation. She tucked the easement back beneath her clipboard. "You are making this much harder than it needs to be." Then she walked back toward the street, her shoes grinding against my gravel. 3 days later, the first violation notice appeared in my mailbox. The first notice said my workshop trim was not an approved shade of brown. I stood beside the mailbox reading it twice while the afternoon sun warmed the paper between my fingers. 5 years in Cedar Ridge, and nobody had ever cared about my trim. 3 days after refusing Cynthia's easement, suddenly somebody had measured it against an architectural color chart. I filed the notice in a new binder and labeled the tab Homeowners Association. A week later came another one. My utility trailer had allegedly remained visible from the street for more than 24 hours. That would have been impressive considering it had spent the entire week inside my workshop. I checked my security camera, printed 2 time-stamped images showing the closed overhead door, and filed those too. Cynthia was not trying to enforce rules. She was testing how much inconvenience it would take to make me stop saying no. By the end of the month, the notices arrived so regularly I could recognize the association envelopes before opening them. Landscaping noncompliance, improper exterior lighting, unauthorized contractor activity, excessive workshop noise. The noise complaint was my favorite because it listed 11:15 at night on a Wednesday. At 11:15 that night, I had been asleep, and my electrical usage report showed the workshop circuit had been shut down since 6:48 in the evening. I appealed every violation in writing. No insults. No angry telephone calls. Just dates, photographs, county records, and copies of the association rules. Paper answering paper. Cynthia responded by inviting me to a compliance hearing. The meeting room smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. She sat at the center of a folding table with Tom Bradley, the association treasurer, beside her. Tom was around 60, silver-haired, quiet, and visibly uncomfortable whenever Cynthia spoke for him. She slid 4 violation notices across the table. "Daniel, none of this needs to continue." There it was again. Not a threat exactly. Something cleaner. More practiced. "Then withdraw violations that are not supported by evidence," I said. Cynthia folded her hands. "Or we could resolve the larger issue and move forward cooperatively." She placed the easement agreement beside the violations. That told me everything. I looked at Tom. His eyes dropped toward the table. "Are these violations connected to whether I sign this?" I asked. Cynthia gave me that polished smile. "Of course not. I am simply offering a practical path forward." I pushed the easement back across the table. "My attorney has reviewed it." The answer is still no. Her fingers stopped against the page. The room went quiet except for the ventilation fan rattling above us. Then she gathered the papers and said the board would proceed accordingly. 2 weeks later, every violation was mysteriously upheld. I paid nothing. I appealed again. Then something stranger happened. A glossy newsletter appeared in every mailbox announcing the Cedar Ridge Community Stormwater Improvement Initiative, a major infrastructure project supposedly designed to protect home values and reduce seasonal runoff. I unfolded the project map at my kitchen counter. Blue lines crossed the neighborhood. One of them ran directly behind my workshop, across my land, right through the strip Cynthia had asked me to surrender. I leaned closer. Beside that blue line were 3 words that made the coffee in my mouth turn bitter. Access approval secured. I had approved nothing. The next morning, I photographed the map, scanned the newsletter, and added both to my binder. Then I drove to the county records office, because if Cynthia was telling 200 homeowners that she had permission to use my land, I wanted to know what else she was telling people when I was not in the room. The county records office opened at 8, and I was standing at the counter by 8:12 with the newsletter folded inside my jacket pocket. The building smelled like old paper, floor wax, and burnt coffee from a machine near the elevators. A clerk named Susan pulled the parcel file for my address and let me review the recent permits attached to it. I expected to find nothing. Instead, I found something worse. There was no permit for the stormwater project at all. No excavation permit. No drainage modification approval. No recorded easement. The only active permit connected to my rear property was the one for my workshop, issued years earlier. I wrote down the document numbers, paid for certified copies, and drove home with that familiar contractor instinct buzzing in the back of my head. When paperwork and physical work disagree, somebody is usually hiding a mistake. Sometimes it is innocent. Sometimes it is expensive. 3 weeks later, Cedar Ridge held its quarterly meeting in the community clubhouse. Cynthia stood beside a projector screen showing photographs of drainage pipes, gravel beds, and excavators. She announced that the stormwater initiative had entered its second phase and that rising material costs required a special assessment of $1,800 per household. The room immediately filled with whispers. Cynthia clicked to the next slide. Total projected cost, $486,000. I nearly laughed. I had priced drainage jobs my entire career. $486,000 buys a lot more than what I had seen behind my workshop. I raised my hand. Who is the contractor? Cynthia paused. Front Range Civil Solutions. And where is the permitted work being performed? Her expression cooled. Throughout the community. Because the county has no drainage permit attached to my parcel. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the projector fan. Tom Bradley shifted in his chair. Cynthia smiled toward the homeowners. Daniel has an ongoing disagreement with the association regarding access, so I understand his concern. That was clever. She turned a financial question into a personal complaint. I tried again. I'm asking about the project budget. And the board has reviewed it. She clicked to the next slide before I could respond. 2 mornings later, an excavator appeared behind my property. The diesel engine rattled my workshop windows while 2 workers unloaded sections of black drainage pipe. I walked outside with my telephone recording the time. The foreman was polite. He showed me a work order authorizing improvements along the Cedar Ridge drainage corridor. My address was printed at the top. Who gave you permission to enter? I asked. He pointed to the authorization line. Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Cynthia Whitmore, President. I told him the association did not own the land and asked him to verify the property boundary before beginning. To his credit, he made a telephone call, shut down the machine, and left within an hour. They never returned. But the invoices kept growing. At the next meeting, the reported project spending had climbed past $200,000. Then $270,000. Cynthia blamed soil conditions, engineering revisions, and material shortages. I started photographing the drainage strip every morning before work. Same dirt, same weeds, same untouched gravel. One evening, while reviewing the meeting packet at my kitchen table, I noticed a line buried beneath 6 pages of expenses. Mercer Property Drainage Rehabilitation, Phase 2. Owner authorization obtained. I stopped breathing for a second. They were no longer merely claiming access. On paper, they were claiming I had given it to them. I stared at those 3 words until the rest of the page seemed to fade around them. Owner authorization obtained. There are phrases that sound harmless until somebody attaches your name to them. I carried the meeting packet into my workshop, switched on the fluorescent lights, and pulled my property binder from the steel cabinet. The hinges squeaked in the cold. Inside were my deed, county plat, workshop permit, inspection certificates, and every document connected to that drainage strip. Nothing had changed. No easement. No authorization. No signature from me. I called Rachel. She had spent 15 years keeping books for a construction company in Denver, and she had the irritating habit of spotting a bad number before I finished explaining it. She came over that evening with her laptop and a yellow legal pad. The smell of sawdust mixed with the takeout coffee she sat beside my table saw. I showed her the association packet. She read the expense page twice. Where are the invoices? She asked. Not included. Contracts? Not included. Change orders? I shook my head. Rachel tapped the page with one finger. Then stopped looking at the total. Follow the paperwork underneath it. The next morning, I sent a written records request to the association asking for contracts, invoices, payment approvals, meeting minutes, and documents showing my authorization. Cynthia responded 4 days later with a polished email saying certain records contained confidential vendor information. That answer bothered me more than a refusal would have. Contractors do not become state secrets because they install drainage pipe. I requested the records again, citing the document access provisions in our association rules. This time Tom Bradley called me. His voice was low. Daniel, I think you should come look at something. We met at the clubhouse before 7 the next morning. Tom unlocked the office and handed me a copy of the board minutes from 6 months earlier. The paper smelled freshly printed. Halfway down page 3 was a motion approving Phase 2 construction on my property. The minutes stated that written owner consent had been received and verified by the president. I felt my jaw tighten. Did you see that consent? I asked. Tom rubbed his forehead. Cynthia said she had it. Did the board see it? He did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. I photographed the page and went home. Over the next 2 weeks, pieces started arriving. A homeowner forwarded me an old budget attachment. Another gave me a contractor summary distributed at a committee meeting. Rachel built a spreadsheet on my workbench while I compared dates against my security camera archive. One invoice charged for 14 workers spending 9 hours excavating behind my workshop on April 18th. I pulled the footage. From sunrise to sunset, the drainage strip sat untouched. At 11:23 that morning, a deer wandered past the fence. At 3:16, the wind knocked over an empty plastic bucket. That was the entire work crew. Another invoice listed 48 tons of gravel delivered to my address. No truck entered my driveway that day. Another billed equipment rental for a machine that never appeared. Then Rachel stopped typing. Daniel. She turned the laptop toward me. Across several documents, the same project description kept appearing, but the payment amounts were different. She added them together. I watched the total climb across the screen. This was not sloppy accounting. Somebody was using my property as a place where expensive work could exist on paper without existing in the dirt. And somewhere inside the association records was a document claiming I had agreed to all of it. My first instinct was to walk straight into the clubhouse, put every document on Cynthia's desk, and ask her to explain it. I did not. 20 years in construction had taught me something useful about bad paperwork. Never interrupt it while it is creating evidence. So I changed tactics. I stopped challenging Cynthia directly and started asking questions that sounded harmless. At the next board meeting, I sat 3 rows back with my notebook closed on my lap while Cynthia reviewed the stormwater budget. She looked completely comfortable. Has Phase 2 been completed? I asked when she opened the floor for questions. Substantially completed, she said. And the property owners involved have approved the work. Yes. In writing. She gave me a patient smile. All required authorizations are on file. I nodded and sat down. I did not tell her I had certified county records proving no easement had ever been recorded. I did not mention the camera footage. I did not mention Rachel's spreadsheet. I let Cynthia's answer enter the meeting minutes. That became the pattern. Every few weeks, I asked one simple question. Was the contractor paid for completed work? Yes. Had the board verified the project locations? Yes. Were the invoices supported by proper documentation? Absolutely. Cynthia answered each one with increasing confidence, and every answer became another dated record. Meanwhile, Rachel and I kept building the timeline. We printed invoices and placed them beside photographs from the same dates. On May 6th, the association records showed $26,400 for excavation and soil removal behind my property. My camera showed an empty drainage strip from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. On May 19th, a delivery invoice listed 32 tons of crushed stone. No delivery truck appeared. On June 2nd, equipment rental was billed for 10 hours. The only vehicle near the workshop that day was my pickup. I saved the original video files to 2 external drives and a secure online account. Rachel created folders by date, vendor, amount, and project description. By midsummer, My steel cabinet no longer held one association binder. It held four. Cynthia apparently noticed that I had stopped fighting her because the violation letters slowed down. One afternoon, she caught me near the community mailbox. "I am glad you finally decided to be reasonable," she said. The sprinklers clicked behind her, throwing thin arcs of water across the grass. "I decided paperwork speaks better than arguments," I said. She laughed softly. "On that, Daniel, we agree." I almost smiled. She had no idea how much we agreed. Then Tom Bradley called me again. This time he would not meet at the clubhouse. We sat in a coffee shop 6 miles away, where the smell of roasted beans covered the silence between us. He slid a folded photocopy across the table. It was a payment approval sheet bearing Cynthia's signature and his. "She told me the supporting documents had already been verified," he said. I trusted her. At the bottom was my address. Beside it was a reference to owner authorization. I asked Tom whether he had ever seen my signature. He shook his head. "But Cynthia has something in the project file." That sentence changed everything. Until then, I knew the association was claiming I had consented. Now I knew there was an actual document pretending to prove it. I folded the copy carefully and put it in my jacket. If Cynthia had created a paper version of my permission, I did not need to confront her anymore. I needed to find out exactly what she had signed my name to. 3 months passed before I learned exactly what Cynthia had put my name on, and when the answer finally arrived, it came with 3 knocks on my front door at 7:12 on a Tuesday morning. I had been in the workshop since 6:30, repairing a cabinet hinge before heading to a job site. The compressor hummed behind me, fresh coffee steamed beside the vise, and the first light of morning was turning the frost along my back fence silver. I heard the knocks through the open service door. 3 clean taps. Not a neighbor. Not someone selling something. When I reached the porch, Evelyn Price was standing there in a gray coat with a black briefcase in one hand and a thick folder in the other. She introduced herself as an independent auditor retained to review Cedar Ridge Estate's financial records after several homeowners questioned the stormwater assessments. Then she asked whether I had received payments connected to drainage construction on my property. I told her no. She asked whether I had authorized the association to perform that work. Again, no. That was when she opened the folder. The first document carried my address. The second carried my name. The third carried something that was supposed to be my signature. I stared at it for several seconds without touching the page. Whoever had copied it had gotten the shape close, but not the rhythm. My real signature leaned forward and finished with a short upward stroke. This one sat flat, careful and slow, like somebody had practiced it. "That is not mine," I said. Evelyn looked down at the page, then back at me. "Are you certain?" I walked into my office, opened my contractor file, and brought out 3 signed permits from previous projects. We placed them side by side on the kitchen table. She did not need me to explain the difference. Then I noticed the permit number printed beneath the false authorization. My workshop permit. A legitimate county permit issued years before the drainage project existed. Someone had taken a real number connected to my property and used it to make the project file look official. That was the first thread. Once Evelyn pulled it, everything started coming apart. I brought out my binders. She brought out the association invoices. Rachel joined us by telephone and opened the spreadsheet we had built. We compared dates. $48,000 for excavation that never happened. $76,000 for materials that never arrived. $91,000 tied to equipment and labor my cameras never recorded. Smaller invoices filled the spaces between them. Evelyn added each amount while I watched the total on her calculator climb. $184,000, $247,000, $289,000. Then she entered the final payment, $312,000. The kitchen went silent except for the refrigerator motor. Evelyn turned the calculator toward me. "All of this was allocated to work associated with your parcel." I looked through the window toward the drainage strip behind my workshop. Brown grass, a shallow ditch, the same old gravel. $312,000 had supposedly passed through that patch of ground, yet almost nothing had physically changed. Evelyn closed the folder halfway. "Mr. Mercer, I need a direct answer. Did you authorize any of these expenditures?" "No." "Did you receive any of this money?" "No." She closed the folder completely. The sound was soft, almost ordinary. Then she reached for her briefcase. "All right," she said. "My next conversation needs to be with Cynthia Whitmore." Evelyn did not tell me when she planned to speak with Cynthia, and I did not ask. By then, I understood the value of letting Cynthia believe she still controlled the schedule. 2 days later, just after 9 in the morning, Tom sent me a message asking me to come to the clubhouse. When I pulled into the parking lot, Evelyn's dark blue sedan was already there. Through the glass doors, I could see Cynthia standing behind the reception counter in a navy blazer, one hand resting beside a silver coffee mug. She was smiling. Then Evelyn turned toward the entrance, and Cynthia saw me. The smile disappeared so quickly, it was almost impressive. I walked inside carrying one of my binders. The room smelled like coffee and the cinnamon air freshener Cynthia always kept near the front desk. "Daniel," she said, "I was not aware you were part of this meeting." Evelyn answered before I could. "Mr. Mercer is the property owner associated with several transactions I need to verify." Cynthia's eyes dropped to my binder. "This sounds like another property dispute." Evelyn opened her briefcase. "It is an accounting review." That changed the temperature in the room. Tom was sitting at the conference table with both hands around a paper cup. Evelyn placed the authorization form in front of Cynthia. "Did you verify this document before approving payments?" Cynthia glanced at it. "The board processed hundreds of documents during that project. This one contains Mr. Mercer's signature. Then I assume he signed it." I reached into my binder and placed a certified copy of my workshop permit beside the authorization. I did not. Cynthia looked at me. "You have challenged this project from the beginning. That does not make the signature mine." Evelyn placed 3 genuine examples of my signature beside the disputed one. Then came the county record showing no easement. Then the permit history. Then the invoices. Cynthia stopped smiling. "Contractors handle field documentation," she said. Evelyn asked whether Front Range Civil Solutions had provided daily work logs. Cynthia said she would need to check. I opened another section of my binder. I already checked the dates. I set printed camera images on the table. May 6th, empty drainage strip. May 19th, no delivery truck. June 2nd, no rented equipment. Cynthia leaned back. "Security cameras do not show every angle. Mine show the only vehicle access to that portion of the property." Evelyn turned to Tom. "Were these invoices approved based on supporting records you personally reviewed?" Tom swallowed. "Cynthia told me they had been verified." For the first time, Cynthia's composure cracked. "That is not what I said." Tom looked at her. "Yes, it is." Evelyn pulled out the payment summary. "The transactions connected to Mr. Mercer's parcel total $312,000. I need the original supporting documents, bank records, vendor contracts, and approval chain." Cynthia folded her arms. "You are implying misconduct based on one homeowner's vendetta." Evelyn's voice never changed. "I am identifying discrepancies based on financial records." Cynthia turned toward me. "You planned this." I looked at the same woman who had once stood behind my workshop and told me I was making things harder than necessary. "No," I said. "I kept records." Evelyn closed the folder and informed Cynthia that the board would receive a formal preliminary report before any additional stormwater payments were released. By 5 that afternoon, an emergency meeting notice had been sent to every homeowner in Cedar Ridge. Cynthia had spent 18 months making sure her version of events existed on paper. The next evening, she was going to have to explain that paper in a room full of the people who had paid for it. The clubhouse parking lot was full 20 minutes before the emergency meeting started. People stood along the walls because every folding chair had been taken, and the usual smell of burnt coffee had been replaced by wet coats and cold evening air each time the door opened. I sat near the back with my binder on my knees. Cynthia sat at the board table beneath the Cedar Ridge Estate seal, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, but she was no longer running the room. Evelyn was. She began without drama. She explained that her preliminary review had identified material discrepancies in the stormwater project records and that additional payments had been suspended pending a complete examination. Then she put the first document on the screen, my authorization form. A murmur moved through the room. Cynthia immediately leaned toward her microphone. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding between the association and Mr. Mercer." Evelyn looked at her. "Is it your position that Mr. Mercer signed this document?" Cynthia hesitated. "That was my understanding." Evelyn displayed 3 verified examples of my signature beside it. Then came the county property record. No easement. The permit history. No drainage permit. My workshop permit number appeared next, showing exactly where a legitimate document had been reused inside the project file. Cynthia tried another direction. Administrative errors happened during large projects. Evelyn clicked forward. May 6th. An invoice for excavation and soil removal. Beside it was a time-stamped image of my untouched drainage strip. May 19th. 32 tons of crushed stone supposedly delivered. Beside it was camera footage showing an empty driveway. June 2nd. Equipment rental for 10 hours. No equipment ever entered the property. The room became quieter with every page. Then Rachel's spreadsheet appeared on the screen, rebuilt and independently checked by Evelyn. The payments tied to my parcel were listed line by line until the total reached $312,000. A man 2 rows ahead of me whispered, "We paid for that." Cynthia's face had gone pale. "Those figures require context." Evelyn nodded. "That is why I requested the original vendor contracts, bank records, work logs, and supporting approvals. And you will receive them." Tom Bradley finally spoke. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "I signed payment approvals because Cynthia told me the documentation had already been verified." Cynthia turned toward him. "Tom, be careful." He looked directly at her. "I am being careful now." That was the moment the room changed. Homeowners who had spent months complaining quietly began asking about their own assessments. Another board member requested an immediate vote to remove Cynthia's financial authority while the review continued. The motion passed. Then came a second motion removing her as president pending the investigation. It passed too. Cynthia gathered her papers without looking at me. There was no dramatic speech. No applause. Just chairs scraping against the floor and people realizing how much trust had been placed behind a title. Over the following months, the association froze the disputed project accounts, hired outside counsel, and expanded the audit. The records were referred to the appropriate authorities for review, while homeowners received corrected financial statements, and the remaining stormwater assessment was suspended. Every violation Cynthia had issued against me during the easement dispute was reviewed and withdrawn. My property remained mine. No permanent access agreement was ever recorded. One Saturday morning, I carried the last association binder back into my workshop. The air smelled like pine, machine oil, and fresh coffee. I slid it onto the steel shelf beside 23 years of permits and receipts. Outside, the drainage strip looked exactly as it had before Cynthia first walked across my yard with her clipboard. Quiet. Ordinary. Mine. I thought about all those envelopes, signatures, invoices, meeting minutes, and carefully worded answers. Cynthia had spent 18 months teaching me how much damage paper could do. She had simply forgotten that paper works both ways. Justice did not arrive shouting. It came quietly, carrying a black briefcase, and knocked 3 times.